It's Thursday, December 15th, 2022, and this is FRC Media News. I'm Keith Tebow. We're going to do something a little different this week than our traditional news program. We're going to share an interview we conducted last week with the two freshman members of the Fall River City Council, Andrew Raposo and Laura Washington. We'll get their perspective on their first year in office, the obstacles they faced, and the help they received, their plans for next year, and the prospects of them running again in 2023. Thank you for joining us today. I'm pleased to be joined by two members of the Fall River City Council today, and not just any two members. These are the two newest members of the council. One came on board actually in January, one in the middle of the year. We thought it'd be a good opportunity to speak with them about their experience, their first year in local office. I'm pleased to be joined by Councilors Andrew Raposo and Laura Washington. Councilors, thank you for joining me. How are you?
Good, how are you? Thank you.
So I'm going to ask you sort of the same question. Let me start with you, Andrew. You know, you've been on since January. Let me ask you, before you got on board, and I think I asked you this last year after you got elected, what was your expectations after Election Day before you got started, and then how did they change once you got in?
So the expectation from the beginning was to kind of learn the process, get comfortable about the people involved in government, what process works what way. That was kind of the first few days and few weeks. The expectation is much now changed. Being a public presence, being involved in the community, hearing from constituents. A lot of the hard work happens outside of those Tuesday night council meetings. Right. Talking to constituents, hearing their problems, communicating to Government Center, having subcommittee meetings where I think a lot of the work actually happens to get things done. So I think it's very much changed, but it's a good change.
Right. Now, Laura, you have a totally different situation. Last November, you lost the election.
I did.
You finished 11th.
11th, yeah.
In the race, and then Councilor Trottley had some personal issues, had to resign this year. The 10th place winner, former Councilor Christopher Peckham, declined to be appointed. Yep. You were appointed. Again, what was that? I mean, you had a short time in terms of expectations, right? And we'll talk about that in specifics, but what did you, when all this happened, what was going through your mind? I
was excited. I was really, really excited. Of course, Trot is a friend of mine, so I was, concerned for him, but I was thrilled that, this is what I wanted, and everything happens for a reason, and the way things happen, so I was excited to be a part of it. But it came like smack dab right at budget season, so right. Whatever my beginning intentions were, I'm going to ease into this, Laura, and it was like bang, you're like in the middle of budget season, so you kind of hit the ground running with your big old binder that was given to you, and it's been great.
So let me ask you, how much, obviously even during the campaign, you communicate with a lot of people. How much has your phone blown up in terms of calls from constituents? Has it? and I guess let me ask you, I mean, it's sort of an aside, sort of behind the scenes in some ways. What kind of calls do you typically get? And are some people still trying to figure out, well, can I call this councilor? Are they too new? Andrew, what do you think?
No, I think the calls that I get and the emails I get are pretty consistent as far as, a resident, a constituent's dealing with an issue, maybe a property issue or a trash issue or, a road issue. A lot of those things that we try to delegate to, okay, I'm going to call this person and we'll see if we can get that taken care of. Those stay pretty consistent. And I think even amongst all of us, if I don't necessarily have an answer, I'll reach out to my colleagues and say, hey, where's the best way to go with this? Who should I contact? Perfect example was this past weekend with the wind and the rain and the trees coming right. down. I'd spoken to some of my colleagues, who's the right point person for this, because people are changing. There's a reorg going on, so we want to make sure that we're getting to the right people, and it seemed pretty successful in that regard.
What about you, Lo? What kind of calls are you getting?
I get a ton of all different types of calls,
yeah.
Ranging from, should we sell bugs in the city? Someone had an idea to
sell bugs.
Yep, they wanted to have a planetarium and sell bugs.
Got that call too.
You got to dirty water issues, pothole issues, trash issues, and then you just get some really good calls of people saying, "Wow, you're doing a really good job." So it's across the spectrum.
Have you both learned? Who to call? You talked about finding out that information. Have you both got a better grasp of who you need to talk to, Laura?
I call. I'm big on chain of command, so I usually call the administration's office and say, hey, this is a call I got. Can you contact that? director or the head of that department to contact me. And so that's how I like to do things, so it follows that chain of command, and things get done right away, relatively quickly. You know, I get calls back.
What about you, Andrew?
Yeah, the same. I mean, I think you know, if I ultimately can't get a hold of a person who's in charge of that, I'll call Seth, I'll call the mayor and say, hey, listen, here's the problem I'm hearing. How can we solve this? And typically, collaboratively, we work together and try to get it done. I mean, that's kind of the name of the game, really.
Yeah. So let me ask you, what's both your relationships with Mayor Coogan? Let me start with you, Andrew.
Fine. I have no issue. I mean, I've told Paul privately and I've said publicly, you know, I'll be present. I'll be there. I go to the briefings. I talk to him often, and I'll tell him, you know, if I agree with something you're doing, great. I'll tell you it's great. If I don't think it's great, I'll tell you it's not great. I mean, I think that's just the kind of the honesty you need between the balance of his office and our jobs as councilors. But ultimately, we need to serve the people and work what's best for them. So, I mean, I think our relationship is professional. It's great. If I have a problem, I know I can pick up the phone and he picks up. So that's a good feeling to have.
Yeah. Laura?
Yeah, the same. I have a great relationship with Paul and his team. Mayor Coogan, you know, if we do a great job of, if we disagree on something, we will shut the door and have it out. And we may agree on it, we may not agree on it, but we always keep it professional. But you know, you can't work in silos. You have to work together as a team in order to get things done. So having a great relationship with the administration really gets things done. So, you know, he's in that position. We work well together. So I'm just glad to be a part of, you know, the entire team. And it really is a team.
Yeah. I mean, the two of you haven't experienced this. You may experience it next year when you're both up for re-election, but it appeared that in 2021, when the mayor was running against former Councilor Ponte, there seemed to be a lot more conflict between the council and the administration on many levels. Obviously, the both of you weren't there. Do you feel that an election year could be a different atmosphere potentially? Not whether for you, but in general. I mean, just because of the nature of the two of you may run for, I'll ask you your intentions before we leave, but may run for re-election, and while the mayor is running, for re-election, it could have been just a one-time thing because there was a colleague of yours, meaning a council colleague, that was running for mayor.
I mean, I think elections naturally bring that out, regardless, and I think sometimes people feel like they have to pick sides. I think it's important to stick to the issues and really, if it's a city councilor, if it's a school committee member, if it's the mayor, you know, who's going to do the job most effectively for the people. And I think that's the opportunity for both candidates, or whatever candidates we're talking about, to voice that to the people. So I think it happens naturally, but I think at the end of the day, we can't get too far off into the back and forth and focus on the job that we have in front of us.
Yeah, that appeared to be a case in 2021, that there's sometimes, not that things didn't get done, but it seemed like that things got in the way, delayed a little bit. If a council would object to something to make a statement, right?
I hope not. I don't see it. I mean, I really see the council works really, really well together and respects each other's. Not everybody agrees. You can clearly see that. Right. But I think people ultimately respect each other's opinion. I don't think there's any hidden motives there. I don't think that would be an issue this election. I don't. I hope I'm not being naive about it. But I think there's a really great council there.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to deal with that.
The subcommittees that you're both on, Andrew, you're on Health, Human Services?
Elder Affairs, yeah, it's a very long title. Yeah, that one.
So are you on any other committee?
Yes. So ordinances is my other big one.
Oh, that's right. And you're also on ordinance committee as well. What else?
Ordinance. I chair the environmental committee and the safety. I don't share that, but I'm on public safety committee.
Do you enjoy those?
Oh, absolutely. I love the one I chair, because I think that's just right in my wheelhouse.
Sure.
Of dealing with youth, being an educator. I think that's perfect, and I think I've learned that it expands beyond just youth. You know, we get to elder affairs and exactly what that looks like, and some of the problems that we can solve. Like currently, I'm working with the Disability Commission on a few things. Kind of, some plans that they were already in process that kind of need to keep going, and I'm working with them on that. But that, like I said before, that's really where a lot of the work starts and happens, because you get onto a lot of conversations with different people of how we can support those processes. So I thoroughly enjoy it. And ordinances also is my other enjoyment. Recently working on that graffiti ordinance that we were doing, something that was on the books that needed to kind of be rehashed again and looked at from a different lens, and I think it was successful, and the council supported it, and here we are.
Laura, what about you, your committees? What do you think?
Yeah, I enjoy working in the committees. I have to say I learned a lot, especially in the ordinance committee. Sean Kadim chairs that committee. He's brilliant. I learn a lot from him, so I really enjoy that committee. I think a lot of the city work, the important work, gets done in that committee. But the committees are great. I mean, it's a council meeting on a smaller scale, very concentrated, and great work can be done. I really enjoy the committees.
How do you get along with your colleagues, and who has maybe helped you along the way to get acclimated through this first year?
So I think when I got started, I leaned a lot on Pam and Sean just to understand the process. I remember when I first got elected, I pretty much met with everybody who currently sits on the council, and before Laura joined as well, just to kind of get the ropes. And I think everybody brings a different level of experience. Obviously, Sean, naturally in his job that he does in Seekonk, brings a lot of municipal experience. And he's always somebody I can go to and say, hey, how does this operate? How does this work? Where does this come from? And he's really good about it. But I think collectively I've gone to each counselor at this point, and they've brought a different skill set to help me be successful in what I'm doing on the council. So I think generally when Laura says as far as that team collaboration is, I benefited from it. I appreciated it.
Laura, what about you? Who's helped?
Current council members have been really helpful for me. Joe Camara, right off the rip, he was so helpful to me. Linda Pereira, so helpful. I called on them a lot, but I also called former councilor Pat Casey. I call her all the time. I love that lady. She's a wealth of knowledge. Ray, he's fantastic. Just both Rays, actually.
Right.
So I mean,
Ray Mitchell, Ray Haig.
Ray Mitchell, Ray Haig. I've reached out to them. Those people are my predecessors who've been there for many, many years, and so I just always am seeking out wisdom and advice from people. So it's Sean. Sean is just a wealth of knowledge. Everybody's been great. I mean, honestly, yeah, they all have been great.
And you all feel you all get along when you need to? I mean, obviously there's going to be disagreements on some issues, but that has nothing to do with your professionalism, right?
For me, no, I have no issue.
Yeah.
I'm perfectly content with how I interact with my colleagues and the conversations I have with them. So,
what about in terms of, both of you have had 2 council presidents in your first year. Pam LeBeau started out, and then she stepped down, and Joe Camara took office. Seemed, from the outside, watching the meetings like I do, it seems fairly seamless. What have you thought?
Yeah, I mean, at the time of the vote, I didn't vote for Joe to be president, but I told him after the fact, hey, listen, you're the president of the council. You have a job to do, I have a job to do. Let's work together and get things done. And that's what I just keep telling myself. And I think to this point, Joe's reacclimating into that position again, something he's held before but hasn't held recently. So we'll just keep working at it. That's really what we're doing.
What about you, Laura?
Yeah, I think it's been a great. So that's a perfect example. So I voted for Joe to that seat, but Andrew and I disagreed on that, but we get along great. I think that's just the way it is. I think that's what makes us a great council. We just, you can disagree, but you can agree to disagree. And so I think it's been a seamless transition.
In any community, including a community like Fall River, there's always people that are going to be naysayers, or people who will say, well, why did you vote for this? Or you're not keeping taxpayers in mind, and why did you vote for this increase in that budget and what have you? Is that sometimes difficult? Because not to hear the naysayers, but to say that they may not know the entire story of what's going on, depending on the issue, obviously.
Yeah, it may very well be that. I actually go back to your original question.
Yeah.
I do enjoy the phone calls that I get from people who are critical about certain things or certain votes. And, I think sometimes before they call, there's some pre-assumptions of what happened. And then, I had one example of somebody who called and stated something. I said, well, that's not true, and here are the 3 reasons why. And it was a good conversation of, oh, okay, I didn't see it that way. And, then I take the opportunity to say, okay, what are some things that you think we can improve on? What are things that are affecting the community? Again, the people are the eyes and the ears on the ground, and we're the people who represent them. So I think a lot of those naysayer calls have actually benefited with the result of something good. So those I enjoy.
Yeah, Laura?
I think that you are going to get naysayers no matter how you vote sometimes. People are just not going to align with your thoughts, your vote, the way you choose to, what I think is best for the city may not be what someone else thinks is best for the city, but it can be a little frustrating when people just make assumptions without knowing all the facts. And but it is what it is. It's part of the course. It's part of the duty, the job, and you really can't get sidetracked by that, in my view.
Were there any assumptions that the two of you may have had coming in about maybe a specific issue that when you found out more about the facts were like, oh, wait a minute, I didn't know this, Laura? I mean, I don't need to give you a specific example, just in general. Were there some things like, oh, wow, I had an assumption about X, and when I got in, it was like, oh, you didn't, you learned.
Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything right now.
Right.
If you give me a few minutes, I don't know, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't think.
I'm a political junkie a little bit,
Right.
so I've watched for a long time,
Right.
being a resident, and I would say yes to that. I think there have been some things that I sat back and watched on TV and go, But then when you find out more facts about it, when you're on the council, you go, okay, that kind of makes sense now. There are still some things I scratch my head at, and that's just kind of
Right.
what we all do. But I think there's sometimes that snippet of a 2-hour meeting doesn't always give all the facts. And I think it's important on all of us to, when residents call and ask questions about those things, that we give them details and explain to them this is the rationale behind it. I got a few calls about the reorg, for example. Perfect example of something that people had some questions and concerns. The recent movement of fire apparatus around the city was
Right.
another conversation. I think going to some neighborhood meetings that I've gone to and the administration have gone as well, there's been some good dialogue of this is the rationale why we're doing it, this is where we're going to go, and we're going to see how it goes from there. Yeah. And I think that's honest conversation, and all of us took some of the goods and bads from that.
Yeah. Are both of you now a little more comfortable in, coming up with resolutions and, being a little more proactive in your role as city council? I'm sure that's something you had to learn as well, right? Crafting a resolution and how that all comes about.
Yeah, I mean, the clerks over at the city council office have been fabulous.
Yeah.
As far as like, hey, I need to put this together. How do I put this in words, basically?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The ladies there are fabulous. And I think it's important that when you file resolutions that they have some meaning behind them. I'm not one of those people who likes to just file just for the sake of filing. I think it's got to have a meaning and a real problem that needs to be solved versus just kind of filing something just for the sake of doing it. So I take a lot of pride in what I put on paper and what I submit, and then where it goes from there.
Yeah. Have you gotten more comfortable as too, Laura?
Yeah, I think
in a few months.
It's been a whirlwind of a few months, but I think there's still a lot that I have to learn. But I can second that. Those ladies up in the city hall are incredible workers. They know the lingo. I'm like, I want to say this, but how do I say it in the proper terminology?
With the whereases.
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm like, I don't know how they know that, but they are amazing, and so they're very helpful. Oh, my Colleen, Lauren, I can just pick up the phone and call anytime. I'm like, I have this idea. What do you think? So, yeah, but it's a lot to learn.
Let me ask you two final questions. One, what do you hope now that you're, not quite a year for Laura, we'll say a year for Andrew, what do you hope to accomplish, next year in 2023 before the election? Any projects?
Yeah, I mean, continuing a lot of the work that I'm currently working on. I hope to get some off the ground with the Disability Commission and getting those ADA compliance issues, more satisfied. Recently, at one of the recent full meetings, the resolution was set down to my committee regarding the parks and improvement of some of the park, where it stands right now. I think there's a huge park plan that needs to be invested into, and we really need to start getting back onto in investing in our parks and making sure that work is done. I would really like to see a lot of movement on that regard happen. But again, that's the collaboration between our Parks Department, Cemetery and Trees, and our new Director of Operations as well. I think I'd like to see that done before running for re-election next year. So
yeah, what are some of your priorities coming up?
My priorities is the thing that we started with the youth in Fall River. That is the foundation of our community that will grow with us. So I'd like to see that through. Really, the resolution that was passed by the City Council with getting these kids activities that they don't have to pay for if they cannot afford it. The parks are a big thing. I get tons of calls about what's going on in the parks, what's happening. So community stuff for our young people, that is Prevention 101. So those are my big things to work on for the next year.
So I've got to ask you, plans for re-election next year?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, 100%.
All right.
Yeah, no question.
Well, thank you for taking the time to join me. It's always good to
Absolutely.
get the perspective of the city councilors, and specifically the newer city councilors. Obviously, someone like Linda Pereira's been on for a while, Leo Pelletier, even Joe Camara. He had a 2-year stint where he's been off, but he's been there for many years. It's good to see fresh perspective, and thank you for joining me. Appreciate it. Happy holidays.
Thanks,
Yes,
Keith.
Merry
Appreciate it.
Christmas.
Thank you. That'll do it for this edition of FRC Media News. Please visit our website at frmedia.org for all the latest news and local information. FRC Media News airs Thursdays at 6 p.m. and Fridays at 5:30 p.m. For all of us here at FRC Media News, I'm Keith Tebow. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Thursday.